Alright, trying something a little bit different. This video is going to be kind of loosey-goosey in terms of script compared to the usual ones, because I mostly just have a lot of notes. But I'm going to start by giving a little bit of information about a different side of internet stuff that I do that I don't really talk about on this channel, but may as well bring it up now. I've been involved in the online creepypasta community for a number of years now. I know creepypasta, immediately you hear it, you go, oh, Jeff the Killer, Slender Man! You know, typical stuff like that. And if I were making like an iceberg meme, those would be like surface level. Those would be the ones that are like above the water, right? Everybody's heard of Jeff the Killer, everybody's heard of Slender Man. Ben Drowned might come to mind, Sonic.exe, things like that are like, you know, universal to the internet. And, you know, I started getting involved with the community in 2018, roughly. I was really active between then and 2020. I was a staffer on the Creepypasta wiki for a while. I'm still active. It's nice to be talking with people from that site again. But I'm not as active as I used to be. I just write when I have an idea and have the time to write it. And in that time, I've obviously gone down the rabbit hole of like exploring different stories, exploring new stories that I hadn't heard of. So you have that surface level that I mentioned before of like ones that everybody has heard of, even if they don't know what a creepypasta is. They might have heard of what a Jeff the Killer is or Slender Man. And then right below that, you might have what I would consider like the classics, the tier of stories that people still maybe kind of enjoy, maybe they've aged a little bit poorly, but like generally considered to be well known and good. So things maybe like Russian Sleep Experiment is a prime example of something like that. And the one I want to talk about today is No End House. So No End House is credited to Brian Russell. It's a short creepypasta about a person who goes to a house to complete a no-end house challenge. And they're offered $500 for making it through all 9 rooms of this spooky house. So they go into the first room and it's like Halloween decorations. You know, it's not really scary. It's kind of a joke. But as they go through the house, it gets more and more esoteric and just weirdly frightening. There's a really cool room where the protagonist turns around and they see what looks like a little girl, but when they try to focus in on the image of the little girl, it changes to a demon. And then when they try to focus on, oh, I'm seeing a demon right now, it changes back to the little girl, and it like they can't actually focus on the entity. It's really neat. And it's overall, it's not a fantastic one. It hasn't aged like super duper well, but it's a fine little concept for an older creepypasta. And I think it deserves its place in the popular creepypasta realm, in that second layer, I would say. It was one of the most well-known ones, to the point that when Channel Zero was happening, I don't know if it still is or if they're still making new episodes or anything, Channel Zero, a sci-fi channel series, reached out, I assume, and made a season, I believe, based on that story. So a creepypasta being adapted into like TV is kind of crazy. And then Jeremy Bates decided to do this. I was going through a bookstore looking for new things to read. I was looking in the horror section because horror is my favorite genre. And the name on the spine caught my eye. I was like, oh, is that like a full publishing of like No End House? Because I knew there were sequel parts, but I never read them. So I pick it up and I'm like, oh, maybe this is like one of those published versions, like Pen Pal. Pen Pal got published into a full book. And I'm like, Jeremy Bates, I don't know that name. So I go onto the Creepypasta wiki and I check, because we're pretty decent with keeping up with sources. We'll update new information as it comes. I think recently we just updated like where the original Rake story came from. And I look on the Creepypasta wiki, and it doesn't say Jeremy Bates, it says Brian Russell. I'm like, huh. And I look on the back, and it's starting to get a little more concerned. And then I did an Amazon search. And I saw that Jeremy Bates has a series of books that he writes where he claims to make adaptations of popular pieces of work. Now, I don't know necessarily if No End House falls under CC BY-SA, a certain Creative Commons license. But I'm going to say this right now. Don't support this. I'm saying, of my opinion, do not support this shit. I bought this with the sole intention of checking how much of this is, in my opinion, stolen or plagiarized, without giving credit. If this was inspired, that's fine. It's a reinterpretation of the No End House style and format. Don't care. That's fine. Not once in this entire piece of shit is Brian Russell mentioned. Not once. There is no mention of any type of original source that this came from. And considering the fact that there are two different pieces of media, a short story on the internet that is semi-popular, and a fucking TV series that use the same name. And there's no attribution, there's no reference given to like who's behind it. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It's just Jeremy Bates as if he came up with this all on his own. That is what pissed me off the most about this. The book itself is fine. I'm going to go through the plot. It's got a lot of problems, but I am so frustrated seeing this. Just, this is why I didn't go script-wise, because I'm going to get very rambly and ranty. It's such a piss off to see somebody taking the idea for a relatively known story and going, I made this, and then publishing a full novel of it and selling it for money. That drives me nuts. Jeremy has done other books like this. He has a book called The Sleep Experiment on Amazon. That just sounds like the Russian sleep experiment. Again, that one's even more known. So I bought this to check it for plagiarism and to prevent somebody else from buying this and, being tricked. And I read it. Not great. It's not terrible. There's a couple of good stuff, but certainly does not beat the bad. So I have a whole list of notes that I took over the course of reading it. Yeah. Not impressed. So let's just get into the story then. So before we even begin the story itself, every chapter of this book opens with a quote. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of stories that do that. Inkheart used it the most interesting, despite it being a very boring book in my opinion, where every single chapter opened with a quote from a different book that would apply to what was happening in this. And I was like, okay, that's kind of neat. This book doesn't do that. It doesn't pull any quotes from anything actually interesting. Instead, it makes up all of its own quotes as they are coming from something called the Book of Nine, which serves literally zero plot relevance until the last 3 pages of the book. And even then, it isn't certain in whether or not it's actually applicable to the plot. It feels like a very rushed in thing. But it's not even that. It's like the quotes are like just shit you would see on a white suburban mom's couch cushion. Like, it's if she was into like creepypastas. Like, a soul burns bright, but 2 burn brighter for chapter 3. Like, really vague, generic shit. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So this story starts by introducing us to the main character, Joe Hadfield. He's 44. He used to have a wife named Jen. The opening passage of the book tells us that she died. And immediately my stupid alarm was going off because of the way she died. You see, Jen did not just pass away in the typical tragic, my wife is dead way. She walked into an airplane propeller and her face got cut off. But that's not the thing that killed her. She actually died at the hospital later in a coma. Yeah. If you want to know why, she was taking night lessons and didn't see the propeller blade of the airplane going. which I don't understand why you would walk in that general direction if you knew the plane was that you were just operating was still spinning. Okay, whatever. Anytime Jen just shows up or is mentioned in the book, she doesn't show up, she's dead. What am I saying? Anytime Jen is mentioned in the book, pretty much, Joe just basically turns into, my wife has no face and I must cry. It's just a lot of boo-hooing. So basically, Joe, to escape his grief, because he's a wealthy real estate guy and has a lot of money, thankfully, he's just walking around the world to run away from his problems. He's just walking everywhere. He's walking across every country on the planet. And he's currently in Barcelona, in Spain. So that's where this story is set. It starts in the hostel bar that he's in. And he's at the bar, and he notices the attention of another woman at the bar, and he's kind of uncomfortable, so he gets up to leave, and he's at the elevator, he looks back over his shoulder one time, sees that she's looking back at him, and he goes back to chat with her. And that's the end of the first chapter. Chapter 2, actually, you know what would be a fun game? If I read the shitty quote at the start of every chapter. You know what? I'm going to go back and we're going to do that. Chapter 1's Book of 9 quote is, "There is no end without a beginning." Deep. Chapter 2. "Dreams dance on stage only when there is nobody awake to watch." Chapter 2 introduces the woman who will be our second protagonist, and that is Helen. These two have very vanilla chemistry, like very, very baseline chemistry. They're both single, middle-aged, straight people who go through some kind of experience together, so they have to end up together in some way. Hollywood writing. Yeah, the flirting in this is kind of crap. The annoying part about Bates's writing style in this is that he will go on in dialogue sections for a long stretch of time, just doing back and forth between the two of them for many lines without any like little physical notes to tell you who's the one talking on a specific line. So it will just be dialogue, 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 dialogue. And because it's so much of it, you can easily lose track of who's flipping when as you're reading it. And this becomes a problem at a very specific point later in the book. I'm going to bring that up. There's none of the stuff like Helen would say, it would be apostrophes, "Yes, Helen took a sip from her drink." None of the Helen took a sip from her drink stuff is in this book. It's just line, 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 line. And that's it. And you're expected to follow along. Every once in a while, there's nothing wrong with that, and doing it for a couple of lines is fine. But I'm talking about, like, every time these two flirt, it's like 7 to 8 lines back to back to back doing that. Anyway, the two of them flirt. Joe tries to compare her to Helen of Troy, and this is where Helen reveals that she's black, because she points out that Helen of Troy wasn't black. There's nothing wrong with that. I want to make that clear for why I'm bringing it up. I want to bring it up because Helen's nationality, as it gets defined over the course of the book, is really fucking weird. It gets so muddled and weird as it goes on. So just keep in mind for now that Helen is a black woman with very bright orange hair. She does admit to dyeing it later, but it's an interesting image for now, is all I'm going to say. While they're going on about this, for some reason in the middle of it, there's a prose section where Joe feels the need to tell the reader about a wedding that he went to in Chile where everything suddenly became about him. Shocker, the humblest human ever, the rich man walking the planet to grieve his dead wife, suddenly became the seat of honor at a fucking random wedding that he just walked into. Helen goes back to her hotel. She came over to his hotel because they didn't have a cafe at hers, and that's why she was there. Sure, whatever. Joe goes back up to his room. He's in like a shared room with like a couple other people. He has a nightmare about his dead wife, and when he wakes up from that nightmare, he overhears two younger people talking about some kind of YouTube challenge involving $5,000. Joe then hears the couple above him getting into their bunk. The guy's being a bit insistent on the girl for sex, but she refuses. So Joe pipes up like the white knight he is and tells the guy off. Again, it feels less than natural or that Joe is a good character and more like I need to assert myself as the nice guy to the reader. Aren't I such a good and amazing person? That wedding really liked me, so they celebrated me, even though it was their day of celebration. And I'm so good, I'll tell guys not to force their girlfriends into sexual situations. It's like, yeah, that's just like a normal, decent person thing to do. Also, what the fuck was that about the wedding? Chapter 3. A soul burns bright, but two burn brighter. Nothing happens in this chapter, just about. Joe and Helen meet for coffee in the morning, because Helen was waiting downstairs. They exposit more dialogue at one another. Helen reveals that she's on meds for anxiety. Joe answers with depression. The haunted house is brought up. Helen suggests they check it out, and Joe initially hesitates, but agrees after divulging part of what happened to his wife. He said that his wife died, but he doesn't explain anything else beyond that. Chapter 4. Her glory is wasted on the blind who walk straight past. What the fuck does this one even mean? So the duo go to the street, and they find the No End house. Reminder, it's in the Gothic quarter of Barcelona. Not like some American suburban shithole. It's a very ornate mansion, and when they knock on the door, an older lady with pitch black hair and a wrinkly face caked in makeup answers. When they ask her about the competition, she just beckons them inside. That's the end of chapter 4. Some of these chapters we can really skim through because there's not a lot going on. One chapter in here is 3 pages long out of 300. Chapter 5. A house lives and breathes only when a warm heart beats from within. The old woman introduces herself as Isabella de Villa Donna Isabella is how I'm going to call her, or just Isabella. They discuss the challenge. They have to get through 9 rooms of the house. Sound familiar? Isabella offers any reward they want, and Helen immediately asks for $10,000. After trying to adjust for $10,000 each, Isabella is mildly annoyed by their greed. Joe then silently recounts in prose an escape room he did with the dead wife, because we can't go more than 2 chapters without being reminded that the wife is dead and has no face. This part also contains a horrific error in it, where in the middle of the prose, he's describing an actor that was working at the escape room, and he jumps into parentheses to talk about it, and then keeps talking about the actor as if the parentheses should have kept going. The sentence said, the set was straight out of a horror movie. Dark, gritty, oftentimes gross, parentheses, and there was even a live actor involved, a freaky yet charismatic fellow who offered some assistance when we got stuck. Parentheses, so the closing bracket, which happened a fair bit because the bulk of the gameplay centered on finding objects and puzzles hidden everywhere. Why is the parenthesis for talking about the hint giving closing before you finish talking about how much help you needed with the hints? It doesn't connect properly with the sentence that you ended on before entering the parentheses. It's like such a basic level error, and it drives me nuts that it was printed. Isabella then leads the two of them to a study where the first door is found as a massive 1 engraved into it. They sign a contract that jokingly has a clause about losing their eternal, yes, it says eternal, not eternal, rights to their soul, should they fail to clear the house. The door opens after Isabella leaves to prepare, and the two walk into darkness. Chapter 6. A room is infinite space, if not corralled by walls. More sage wisdom. Room 1 starts with a long tunnel, leading to a T-split, where they find a pair of skeletons in an erotic position that start moaning when approached, and jiggling and jostling and doing what you think. Right after they encounter this, Joe turns around to find a hulking man in denim overalls with a sack on his head, only having one slit for sight, and carrying 2 large cleavers. The man is intimidating, but says nothing as the two leave, and Joe specifically refers to him as Jason from Friday the 13th too. Why? Do you need to take from more things? Do we really need to take from everything for this story? Because this is not where it ends. Continuing on, they find another character actor, a large, grotesquely obese man sitting by a stagecoach. He asks them to identify the true items of food within 6 boxes he has, as a sorceress cursed him to not know what they truly contain and make him think they are human organs. Joe participates and correctly identifies 5 of the 6 items. The fat man, referred to by Joe as Lardass, a name he chose from the Stephen King movie, had mentioned prior that for each incorrect guess, he would claim an organ from one of them. But before he goes through with that, Lardass clones the stagecoach doors to reveal... Clones? What am I saying? Lardass closes the stagecoach doors near him to reveal the number 2 painted in black on their backside. Chapter 7. To get lost and give up, or to give up and get lost. Both are a union made in hell. Right, that one's like actually kind of fine for a horror novel so far, but I don't know what it has to do with the next section. Joe and Helen go through the hole that's number 2. We just forget about Lardass for now, don't worry about it. And you wind up in a mirror maze of sorts. Joe says something inflammatory to Helen, including saying that she looks like a savage for having the torch. Yikes. She obviously gets upset at him for this, reasonably so. And this leads into a pointless ramble about a girl Joe used to know. Again, prose, where he's just kind of ranting at the reader about this past memory he has. Where he used to go over to this girl's apartment every weekend to drink and talk. They were never a real couple, though. And after refusing to go out somewhere with her one night, the relationship became awkward and they just stopped being friends, which led to him moving out of that apartment complex and into a new place, which led to him meeting Jen, the no-face dead wife, in a clothing store because she wanted him to try on a sweater that was her boyfriend's size, but then that was a lie because the whole point was that she didn't actually have a boyfriend and she just wanted to get him to try it on because she liked him. What was the whole point of this fucking section again? They also run into a mirror with a Nazi dwarf in it, which they both call a midget because midgets call each other midgets. That's a line in the book. I don't like the book. They move along. The Nazi dwarf shouts that he's going to get Helen, but and then they hear glass break, presuming that he escaped, and they run off into the maze. They leave muffin crumbs to find their way back in the dark, aside from their torch, but they eventually sit down and take a break because they're like in they're middle-aged people and they're old and they can't walk around that much, I guess. It's only when they're finally within the maze that the two realize that room 2 might actually be the maze, as though they were expecting this to just be a passageway despite how elaborate it is. Joe then has a horrific migraine, which hasn't been mentioned as a thing up to this point, and he blacks out. And we get another dream sequence. This one's just kind of really weird, where he dreams about going on a hike in summer before a bunch of girls in winter clothing start following him with hatchets. Reaching his favorite spot on the trail, Joe turns to find Jen with the girls, also dressed that way in like ski uniform or like winter faring jacket and pants. And then there's a goblinized version of a man named Blake Brown who walks up and starts making out and getting handsy with his dead wife. And then Joe does another rant at us again through the prose for 2 pages about how Jen had cheated on Joe with Blake and it nearly broke their marriage up. And then it cuts back to the tarmac with Jen bleeding out and Joe is happy that her lips are gone, so she can't kiss Blake anymore. And that's the end of the dream sequence. I will give Bates this. You certainly made a confusing sequence like a real dream sequence. I don't know what it added to the story, though. I'm joking. I'm being sarcastic. I do know what it added to the story, I think, at the very end, and I don't like it. Joe wakes up eventually, and Helen tells him that she's figured out what they have to do. They have to go back in the maze to where the mirrors were more clustered together. Joe gets pissed after finding the crumb trail is gone, assumed from the Nazi that did it, and starts smashing mirrors, which reveals black painted arrows on the walls behind the mirrors, pointing in the right direction. Why is this the correct solution? How would Joe have known that he was supposed to smash the mirrors to find the right way? Then they find a big mirror at the end of this path with the arrows with 3 fleurs-de-lis above it, the same symbol that were on Lardass's carriage, apparently. And Joe breaks that mirror and it reveals a new door. Chapter 8. One's age is the most consequential of numbers. So the two of them find themselves in a room similar to Lardass's, except this time there's like a carnival booth with a woman named Carmilla behind the counter. Another reference. There are 4 platters with human heads on them, and Helen is forced to guess the ages of the heads, the people that the heads belong to, with the difference in her guesses being added up and taken from her own remaining lifetime. Helen manages to only lose 15 years, after which Carmilla orders the naked people to step out of their holes from underneath the table and walk away to give access to door number 3. Which is the next door. So now I can see how we're going to bloat 9 doors into 30 plus chapters. Very worthless page break as well in this chapter. This is something that happens a lot throughout the entire book, is that there's a page break or paragraph break between sections of paragraphs. And usually use that to indicate like a short period of time has passed. But there's other times where there's a paragraph break or a page break. I'm not sure which one's the defining term. I didn't do an English course. Where it's in the middle of a fucking conversation. And it's like used as like a weird punctuation point to end a section, or feels like it was meant to be the cliffhanger to a chapter. There's a lot of pointless page breaks in this book. I don't know why. Helen also keeps referring to Carmilla in this section as Vamp Milla very aggressively. Just a very awful and cringy nickname. She also states before the game that Joe lost an organ, but Lardass never claimed anything from him. Again, it's going to come up later, but Chapter 9. The best explorers know not what they seek. That's the point of being an explorer. Because the thing with these quotes is that they take up like almost about half a page. So it fills up a lot of fucking space when you do it on every single chapter and just pushes it to 300 pages. Chapter 9. So they're in the tunnel leading to the next zone. The two of them are arguing about Carmilla because Helen was being really needlessly bitchy about her. And then is also simultaneously super excited about the challenge, but is super critical of all the actors they've encountered thus far. The dialogue is also trying desperately to feel realistic, but because these two are becoming more unlikable as the story progresses, it makes the dialogue between them even more insufferable to read through and annoying. Like, they're weakly characterized, and the back and forth is just not doing it for me at this point. So eventually the tunnel leads out into an immense cavern filled with 50-foot statues, and the two of them argue some more, but this time about the nature of this cavern, whether the world really knows of its existence, why Isabel would hide this or have it to begin with, like how did she get the statues down here, and Joe not wanting to go further, while Helen, once more flipping character, wants to keep going. Like, the two of them are just back and forth at this point. The room is filled with mushrooms. Again, imagine like a large cave. And Helen comes to the conclusion that some of them must be magic mushrooms that will get them high, which will somehow reveal the key to getting through the room 4. So Joe examines the mushrooms. He's not entirely certain, but thinks he's found some psychedelic mushrooms because of his time traveling the world. He has to pick berries and shrooms off the side of the road when he's walking, and so that's why he's kind of familiar. I think that's a good little quick moment of character definition. I actually kind of like that with Joe, is that like it was established that he's wandering the world, probably has to pick off food from wherever. Makes sense that he would be kind of familiar with checking mushrooms and stuff. And then Helen just immediately starts eating them because, like, his word's good enough. It's like, oh yeah, I think this one might be so. Yeah, immediately. Chapter 10. This is one of the longest quotes, and also one of the dumbest. Some believe mushrooms are the flesh of gods. Others believe they are the food of gods. What cannot be debated is that they allow mortals to communicate with the gods. So both of them get high because the mushrooms are indeed psychedelics. And they have more meandering conversations because that's what most of their dialogue is in this book of trying to build up chemistry. Helen asks if Joe has ever done mushrooms before, and instead of telling her, we swap into prose, and Joe recounts a pointless story where he did do them in college and nearly freaked out. Tell her! Joe's just like, no, I'm not going to tell her. But I will recount this to the reader for some fucking reason. I don't understand why. Like, you could tell it in prose and then just say, I relayed this story as I just told you to Helen. But for some reason, he just decides not to tell Helen. I don't understand why he's behaving like this. It doesn't make sense. Helen then decides to tell her little life story and recounts a time when she was kidnapped for a year by some guy that she apparently knew the name of, and he kept her in his basement. She believes, this is touchy subject, she believes he did things, not sure, she can't quite remember, but she believes it happened. Then she regales him with how she escaped by breaking a mirror over the criminal's head and killing him. Now, remember at the start of the story when I was talking about how they constantly flirt with each other because it's got Hollywood level writing where a man and a woman that are the main characters of a movie have to hook up together? Well, baby, they get fucking. They don't actually get fucking. They get making out and they get undressed a little bit in the mushroom piles. And they're getting handsy and they're touching some spots. They're touching spots with the hands, and that's about it, because as they're in the middle of doing it, they both suddenly hallucinate a mushroom hut behind them. Chapter 11. There is that which is real, that which is unreal, and that which exists in the space between. Every one of these I read is like a little blood vessel in my brain popping. So chapter 11, obviously they go towards the little mushroom house, and they're led in by a feral-looking woman with ragged blonde hair. She serves them tea and then warns that her godmother grows the mushrooms as her children, and she doesn't take kindly to visitors. But before Joe and Helen can hide, the godmother returns, similarly described to the beldam from Coraline, although Bates doesn't actually call her out as the beldam. I don't believe he does. On quick rechecking, there's no actual reference to the term beldam in it, but the description is more or less like your stick-fingery witch that you can imagine. Image on screen now. I don't usually do that. But yeah, basically she comes back, he sees her in the window. So then we get a 2-page flashback scene in the middle of this action horror scene when like the beldam arrives and starts getting scary. It's like, jump scare. Ah! I bet you're wondering how I got here. Well, I was walking around the world, and then he does like a 2-page thing talking about how fear can make you do crazy, stupid things. It does tie into the next section where he grabs Helen and jumps into the oven because it has a 5-sided door, but it really kills the fucking pacing. Like, it's rough. Anyway, they fall into darkness, and then Joe blacks out again. Chapter 12. Are dreams born of the mind, Or is it the very opposite? That's not like my mind being blown. It's pieces of my skull flying out when I use a shotgun to put myself to sleep at night after reading this terrible book. The chapter opens with Joe having a nightmare of going on a Disney ride called Snow White and Her Adventures, but Jen and Helen are both there and are not taking the fucked up aspects of the nightmare version of this ride seriously. And when Joe awakens, he's tied to a chair in a dark room with Lardass and the Nazi midget standing before him. They have taken his kidney. They took the organ, they claimed it, they cut out his kidney, and then they knock him out again so they can finish his sutures. And it's the first proper and good use of a page break in the whole book so far, because he gets knocked unconscious, there's a little bit of space, and then he wakes up again. So then, when he wakes up again later, Helen finds him and unties him, which is when Joe calls off the challenge to Isabel. He's like, fuck this, they just took my goddamn kidney. I'm done with your shitty little haunted house. Let us out. And then all the lights suddenly flash on in this pitch black room, and their hostess reveals herself to be in the room with them, back in the palace from the start. Chapter 13, there are animals, there are human beings, and there are gods. Which is a question for the ages. Again, more vagaries. Yes, each of them, like, revolve around the chapter, or, like, they pertain to the events of the chapter, but they're so I'm 14 and this is deep type quotations. It's aggravating to read. Before we get into the events of the chapter in particular, I want to draw attention to Isabel's fit that she's wearing in this scene. Skin-tight blue leather, gold snake belt, and bracelets. Anyway, Joe is furious with losing his kidney, reasonably so, but Isabella brushes it off as not being responsible for anything her workers do as a side hustle. She actually describes it as a side hustle. This rickety old woman who seems to be able to bend time and space within the confines of her own house and uses it as a source of entertainment to watch people suffer going through it, use the term side hustle. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying that she acts or feels like she's meant to be more ethereal, and that phrase just immediately brought her to earth. But she doesn't keep acting like it. Helen then also realizes that she has paid her price, and she's actually appears to be 15 years older. She's like in her 60s now. Joe wants out, and Isabella shows him the door so he can leave. Joe is ready to go, but Helen says that they have to finish the house. She reminds him of the clause that forfeits their souls if they don't finish, and considering the weirdness currently going on with missing kidney, being aged to age 60, they both agree that it's entirely possible that they could really lose their souls. So they approach door 6, and then the book turns into Jurassic Park. Adventure is often found in the unlikeliest of places. Going through that door, they find themselves in a dark tunnel again, before stumbling upon a giant centipede skeleton. And they continue into the light, and they're in a massive forest, and they see a line of smoke way the fuck off in the distance, and they just start walking for it. And that's pretty much the chapter. They just kind of start walking. Chapter 15. Time is both a voyage and an illusion. So, it's Jurassic Park. We're ripping off Jurassic Park now. We weren't satisfied with just stealing from an episode you saw on the television, and from a creepypasta author, and from Friday the 13th, and from Carmilla, and Stephen King. No, that wasn't enough. Now we're just going to do Jurassic Park. They literally spend most of this chapter spewing dinosaur trivia and openly stating we're in the Jurassic period. Like, they literally say we are in the Jurassic period in this section of the book. Because Helen's education specialty, as her role as a education specialist, appears to be whatever the plot needs it to be. Whatever she needs to know in the moment of the story, She just knows it. Now again, I'm not saying that she can't be an education specialist. It just feels like she knows a bit too much about a bit too much of everything. Strangely also, Helen being aged to age 60 doesn't appear to actually be doing much to affect her. Now, before Bates says, actually the chapter before this, she was tired from walking, that's like one of like 3 passages where it actually kind of is mentioned that she seems to be getting more tired. Is the first chapter of them walking through the woods. This chapter, almost nothing. She's 60 now, trying to trek through Jurassic period jungles to get to this smoke that's rising from the ground. You may as well just forget the fact that she was turned 60, because it feels like Bates did as well. Her characterization is also constantly flip-flopping between doom posting and being completely amazed by her surroundings, nearly to the point of like alternate personalities. She's so inconsistent that I'm honestly beginning to wonder at this point in the book that she was in on the whole deal. Like she was actually involved in the house and was just trying to push Joe along to finish it. And she like lured him there or something. They also find a dinosaur at the river. They argue more about the time period. And then they sleep in a tree as a T-Rex appears beneath them. The same one that Joe has a nightmare about like 2 seconds beforehand, where it like eats Helen and kills her. This chapter is also home to that awful dialogue exchange I was talking about earlier. So in this chapter, they do the same thing where they like literally just do back, forth with no actions to break things up and remind you of who's talking on what line. So you have to like keep it in your head as you jump back and forth between these 6 lines to tell. So it begins with, just checking on you, I said. So Joe said that. What time is it? This is on the exact same sentence. So it implies that there's a breather there where it says I said, as in Joe said, and then he's asking what time it is. No idea, from Helen. Joe, I'm so uncomfortable. Helen, might only be a few more hours until morning. Joe, I want my bed. Line jump. Me too, I said. Who proofread this? Seriously, who the fuck proofread this? Because either that was just a flat out intentional error because you can't keep track of bouncing dialogue like that, or there was an error in the fact that it wasn't supposed to have what time is it in the same line as Joe. You could drop it down to having Helen ask that question. Like, again, this is what pisses me off, is that this idea was not original, and it is not being credited to the original creator, and yet is being shitted out and sold for money. Chapter 16, The Natural Evolution of Understanding is Action. What does that mean? The Hallmark card? So anyway, the T-Rex goes to sleep right beneath them, and Joe looks at it, and he says that it looks like a toy dinosaur he had when he was a kid. And then Helen, off of that, just pieces it all together. She figures out how the no-end house works. She realizes that it takes their past and memories and it uses them against the challengers. The mirror breaking connects with how Helen escaped her kidnapper. The toy dinosaur became a real dinosaur for Joe. And here's the reveal where we start to get into Helen's weird nationality. The Nazi dwarf from earlier is because Helen is Jewish. Again, nothing necessarily wrong with being Jewish. It's fine. But when I have to describe Helen as a Jewish black ginger woman, it feels like I'm saying a racist 4chan meme from 2013, because that is what has been described in this book. She's a black woman with bright orange hair who happens to be Jewish. Did Bates think any of this through, or is he just dropping shit into the story as he goes along? Like, here's the thing. Helen's attitude when she's not flip-flopping and being an inconsistent character, she's an interesting enough character. Like, I kind of like the way she talks. but her characterization is so fucking all over the place. It's insane. So anyway, she basically realizes that, yeah, okay, our memories and our pasts are what are affecting the things that show up in the house. So those are the things that we're scared of. And then she suggests that the T-Rex is meant to help them get to the next room. So, obviously, they gotta figure out how to use the T-Rex, and that leads into the next chapter. Anyway, chapter 17. Friends can be enemies, and enemies can be friends. It depends very much on the moment. So, Joe approaches the T-Rex, and the duo get on its back and ride it to the source of the smoke, which is a giant burning tree guarded by a triceratops that's based on another one of Joe's memories. It's fucking meaningless. All you need to know is that it was based on another one of Joe's memories. The two creatures start fighting each other, and Joe is forced to flee for the tree with Helen so that they don't get trampled. That's all that happens here. And now we're halfway through the book. Chapter 18. Adversity is a great teacher. It is also a killer. So at chapter 18, they go through the hole in the tree. And Helen's like, oh, how'd you know to go through the hole in the tree? And he's like, this was marked. It was marked. There was the sign of 7, so that we know this is the way to room 7. And she's like, oh, how did you know that? And he's like, Triceratops. Number of horns. Triceratops has 3 horns. But no, Bates is going to cheat again and say, see, you'd think that, but actually it had 2 little horns on each of its cheeks too. Whoa. So, they go through the fucking door. They keep walking and walking and walking, and they realize that maybe if they think of nothing, then that will form the next room. It will be something that isn't scary. There won't be much there to scare them. So they think about nothing. They focus in on nothing. I should say before I move on from all the Jurassic Park stuff, this section goes on, like, the chapters here are fuller than the previous ones. Like, these ones feel more full. The switch over to Jurassic Park just comes out of nowhere. It really feels like it came out of nowhere. They put dinosaurs in my no-end house. Why? Go through, and they wind up in a vast desert, just endless expanse, gray skies, nothing in sight. And the tree behind them turned into like a shriveled up piece of shit. So they just start walking. And they walk for, I think, what is described as like a day, essentially. Like a day and a night. Reminder again that Joe is 44, Helen is now 60-ish. And she's not showing any signs of fatigue. But they keep walking, and then all of a sudden, in the distance, they see Jason again. And he starts coming towards them, so they just run the opposite way. And eventually they run so far that they find a building in the middle of nowhere in the desert. Just a building. That's fine. It's a neat visual. Chapter 19. When reality can no longer be trusted, imagination becomes a necessity. So, chapter 19, they go into the building because it's got a revolving door at sand level. And they find a bar and an elevator. They go in the elevator and has 110 floors, meaning that there is a button there that has just the number 8 on it. A very obvious room 8 signifier. Now, what button do you think they have to push to go to room 8? If you said button 8, you would be correct. And that makes Helen even more fucking stupid because she just starts mashing the ground floor button. Now, granted, the elevator doesn't work, but she starts going into complete hysterics over the fact that the ground floor elevator button isn't working. When, if you even applied 2 seconds of thought, you should realize, oh my god, there's a number 8 on the elevator. I'm gonna room fucking 8. Jason eventually arrives because they're too busy fucking around in the elevator. And then Joe goes and gets a bottle, and they beat up on Jason. He shows up, tries to kill them, and they beat him to death, like, really easily. Like, Joe just has a chair and just, like, holds him away. And then they get him down on the ground, take an axe from him, shove it in his head, and then Helen just stomps on Jason's head repeatedly. These two very normal average middle-aged people who are not going to be later revealed as like super soldiers or anything, or like previous war experience from as far as I can tell, are just immediately fine with killing somebody. They literally fall asleep right after they kill him. It just doesn't feel real. I get that this is a work of fiction. They're like supposed to be normal, average Joes and Helens. Because that's what makes it scary, is that they're normal people, this could happen to you, and they're put into strange circumstances they cannot understand or comprehend. And now they're just cold-blooded killers. There's a thing towards the end that might explain it. I don't like it. Also, keep in mind the fact that they killed him after like a supposed day of walking through the desert with no food or water either. And they beat up like this hulking mega mass with big muscles, overalls, and 2 meat cleavers in his hands. And they just kick the shit out of him in like half a page. Joe sleeps, he wakes up, and Helen explains that she has realized what this building is, where they currently are, and they're in the observation deck of the former Sears Tower in Chicago, and that she was there as a kid on a bring your kid to work day with her dad when she was given a toy of the tower for some reason. And then she rambles about having a sandbox as a kid for way too long, all to say that desert led to sandbox, led to Sears Tower toy, saving them as her thought process. Like, those are the connecting threads that probably caused this particular room to come into fruition. And then they take a key from Jason's pocket, they put it in the elevator, they try it again, and they scavenge enough brain cells between the two of them to try floor 8 this time. Yippee! Floor 20. No, chapter 20. Memories are toxic. The good ones turn nostalgic, while the bad ones remain bad. So, I'm going to put a warning here for this one. This one does some very strong retconning that comes out of fucking nowhere and deals with some kind of gross themes. It doesn't do them well, and it doesn't do them in like very much detail. I'm going to be talking about them kind of in passing, but I have to bring them up because they're kind of important still to the plot. Yeah, if you want to tune out of the video from this point on, you watched far enough. I appreciate it. So the duo, they exit on floor 8, and it's an office block with celebrative decorations scattered across the cubicles. They turn down one of the hallways, and they see a man off through one of the glass walls of a meeting room sitting down. And Helen immediately recognizes him as her father. And then we get the full retcon that applies to her kidnapping. And I say retcon because this part doesn't feel like a natural extension of where Helen's past went as a kidnapped child. It feels like there needed to be something scary for this section, so that part was twisted into this. Because Helen's father, Chip, is revealed to be the one that kidnapped her, and he was a big kid diddler. Massive. Like, he just loved doing that. He also loved game ending people. He game ended his wife, and he game ended an old woman, and then took over her house, and then just told people that, oh, I'm the old woman's son. I've been taking care of her because she's ill. Despite the fact that Helen mentions the dad having people over for, like, meetings or just talking to people when she was kidnapped the first time she mentioned that she could hear people upstairs. I feel like you shouldn't let people in the house at all. The part that really makes it feel like this was all like a sudden idea that just popped into Bates's head at this part of the story is that Helen turns to Joe and goes, there was also another little girl down there with me that he killed. I feel like if you were a kidnapping victim, I have not been kidnapped, so I cannot speak from personal experience. But I would feel like if you were kidnapped and there was another person there, that you would be connecting with that person in that situation and have a sympathetic relationship with each other. Like, oh my God, we're both victims of this horrible thing that's going on. I will never forget you. Especially if one of them got fucking murdered. You just failed to mention it the first time around you were telling the story. I can get not wanting to say, oh, it was my father, because that brings like a whole nother layer of complexity. Saying there was another person there feels like something that probably should have been brought up the first time you told the story. And it feels worse here because it feels like we just needed a gross visual of having the beaten little girl come in with a chocolate cake so that Chip could celebrate his daughter coming home so he can do more things to her, even though she's an old woman now, but he doesn't care because he's just gross like that. This fucking chapter set me off. I was so annoyed with everything going on here. Just, it's fucking gross. It's handled extraordinarily poorly, and it just feels like it's meant for shock value that doesn't really add much and just kind of makes the story shittier overall. They have the chocolate cake. Joe and Helen have a slice each because as much as they hate Chip, they are famished. They haven't eaten or drank anything for like a day. So they shove the cake in their mouths, and then before Chip can get a slice, Joe just slaps the tray and knocks the cake on the floor. And Chip goes like, "Oh, you think you're such a tough guy, huh? Well, let's see what you say when you see this. Hey, Jen, get that ugly-ass face of yours in here." And then we move on to chapter 21, because that's the cliffhanger. A game is not unlike torture. Each provides entertainment at another's misfortune. I would say this book also counts as torture by that description. So Jen enters the room. She has bandages all over her face. She looks like Curly from mouthwashing. And she's also covered in balloons. And otherwise, she's just naked. And Chip produces 9 darts filled with venom of a Brazilian wandering spider. Why or how, I do not know or care at this point. It is the house messing with them, but like, why did it need to be very specifically that spider? Whatever. And he tells Joe to pop 9 balloons without hitting his dead wife, because any one of them will just instantly kill her. If he succeeds, Chip will lead them to room 9. If not, they're stuck in room 8 forever, and he's just going to try to diddle his daughter forever, apparently. Joe gets a number of the balloons, but when they start getting low, Helen kind of gestures to his wife, and I don't know how he didn't notice this to begin with. But he asks Jen to turn around, and she has a bunch of balloons taped on her back. And Chip goes, dang it, how'd you notice that? And Joe keeps throwing the darts, and pops a bunch more, but then the last dart hits his wife, so she drops to the ground, and they freak out, because like, oh no, you're trapped in the house with me forever. So Helen grabs a dart and goes to stab her dad in the eye with one of them, and Joe pulls her back for some reason, and he's like, oh hey, get her off me. Okay. Look, maybe I can give you guys a second chance. He goes and he takes one of the balloons off of Jen's dead body, tapes it onto Joe's head, and he gives Helen 1 dart and says, "Pop the dart without hitting your new boyfriend." Chip is introduced as an Irishman. He's white. Joe specifically points that out and says, "He's white." And Helen goes, "Yeah, I'm half black, half white." She then goes to explain that her mother was from Senegal. Senegal is a primarily Muslim country. Jewish heritage, from what I understand, is typically passed down maternally. It's passed down through the mother. So just to clarify, she has a white Irish father who's a massive piece of shit, and she has a black Senegal mother whose grandparents went through the Holocaust, apparently, and that's where she got the Jewish lineage from, even though Senegal is a massively Muslim country, and then she has bright orange hair on top of all that. It feels like a meme. I hate to say it. Taking all of this into one character, it feels like a weird 4chan meme to describe Helen's nationality. It feels off to take all of that together. And Joe doesn't get like anywhere near this level of description in regards to his nationality throughout the book. It just doesn't. It feels like there's just weird side angles being tossed in onto Helen at very inappropriate times and in very inappropriate ways. I've never seen a more confused character in a book. Now, the last thing I want to rant about for chapter 21 before Helen has to start throwing the dart in chapter 22 is that there's a piece of imagery in this chapter. It's not that it's like gross. It's a little bit gross. It's a thing that Chip does. But because of the way that it is described, I don't want to just out and out say this book was AI written. I will be completely honest, I would not be surprised if that was the case. because this does feel like a quick cash grab. I'm not going to claim that because I don't have any proof of that being the case. However, the description that is made is so weird that I couldn't stop but help and linger on it for a while. So what the book describes is that when Joe starts throwing the darts at his wife, Chip was back in the executive chair, his feet up on the desk. The little girl who had brought the chocolate cake knelt stiffly between his legs, facing us, eyes haunted, while he massaged her shoulders. Now, yes, very gross imagery. However, I bring you this. If his feet are up on the table like this, she's between his legs. How is he reaching to massage her shoulders? Like, is he around the sides? Is he reaching down and scraping his gooch with his forearm? Like, what is this imagery? It doesn't make a lick of sense. If it said she was sitting off to the side of the chair, it'd be like, okay, he's reaching down on the side. No, she's sitting between his legs. But his legs are up on the table. Is she, like, sitting up on, like, this bouncing bridge of legs? It doesn't make a lick of sense. I don't understand what the visual is for this scene. And it feels so fucking off that it, like, dinged that little alarm for a moment. That made me go, Chapter 22. Second chances are quite often last chances. Wow, very deep. This chapter is very short. It's only 4 pages. Helen kisses Joe before she starts throwing the darts. And most of the chapter is just prose of Joe worrying in his head that he's going to get struck. But, of course, she succeeds. She hits the balloon. Chip grumbles about it. The girl just disappears with Jen. Chip smashes one of the office windows to let a bunch of sand in, but then it shows like a stone tunnel, and he disappears. That's it. It's 4 pages. That's chapter 22 done. Chapter 23 is only 3 pages. We're getting even shorter because we're crunching shit now. I don't understand why we have such short chapters in these sections and then an innumerable amount of page breaks. It's like, why? Why are you doing both in the same book? Like any good story, a journey has a beginning, a middle, and an end. They share nervous banter again about going on a date after they get out of the house when they enter room 9. It's a gladiator arena filled with corpses, and they hear Isabella's voice say that an opponent will be sent to fight them every hour until they escape. That's it. That's the whole chapter. That could have been crunched into 22. Why are we forcing the book to be artificially longer by making a whole new chapter? So, like, there's about a third of a page for the end of 22. And then there's, like, almost another half page. So you basically just invented an entire new page just for this one chapter. Like, come on. Those two could have easily been fused together. So, chapter 24. It is not impossible to escape the mind of a god, but it is not terribly easy either. Helen and Joe, they look around mostly at the dead bodies instead of a way out. Helen keeps theorizing that this is the labyrinth of King Milos, Theseus and the Minotaur. And so because of that, she thinks that a Minotaur is going to come up to get them. Eventually they find a weapon rack, and they practice a little bit with some weapons because they have no clue how to get out, and they need to prepare for whatever is going to be coming up that elevator. Chapter 25. Old scores tend to get settled one way or another. So when the first hour ends, a massive part of the arena floor descends like an elevator, and then it returns a few moments later with Moritz, the Nazi midget, on it, as they keep referring to him throughout the book. He's got a big black square spiral, I'm going to say, painted across his chest, and a red chainsaw in hand. The two of them just flank him, and Joe smashes his knees in with a mace, followed by his face. Again, these two are surprisingly good at and mentally okay with just murdering people. Now, I'm not saying that Moritz didn't have it coming. It's just that it should probably take more willpower from such normal people to actively kill somebody or be able to. The fight for this lasted 2 of the 5 pages that this chapter takes up. Chapter 26. If in each moment an infinite number of possibilities exist, then anything is fair game. Again, just meaningless words. Helen suggests that they try to take the lift down, so they do that. The area they arrive in doesn't appear much different than the first floor, but Helen wants to keep going down the lift because she thinks if they go down like 10 layers or 9 layers or something, that'll take them out. But Joe's not certain, so he takes his foot, and before they go down to the next layer, he draws out something in the sand on the side of the arena, not on the platform they're on. So the lift goes down, and when they come down, they still see Joe's name in the sand in the same spot. So they're just going down, and they're ending up in the same room, essentially. And that's the whole chapter. We're really crunching for content in these last few. 27. Family is bonded by blood until that blood is spilled. Oh, look at that blood. The next opponent to come up the escalator after hour 2 is Chip with his poison darts. Oh no, a fleeting moment of peril for our heroes, because if these things fucking touch them, they'll die. And Chip's actively trying to throw them at them this time. Oh no. Too bad Chip is a massive pussy that runs away the second Joe lets loose an arrow in his general direction. He flees like a coward, then he trips, and he gets his foot caught in a ribcage, and that gives Joe the time to shoot him in the chest with an arrow at like point blank range. And then Helen goes up for the finishing move, and a really lame quote about being happy to kill him again. She's like, you know what, Dad? I'm really happy to kill you again. Maybe I should say something quippy here. Nah, I don't think you're worth it. Like, that's like almost verbatim what is said in the scene, and it's so fucking cringe. I should also say that Joe is able to use multiple types of weapons over the course of it. I think he starts off with the mace, then he uses the bow and arrow, and then he uses a spear in the next few sections, or a halberd of some sort. Helen's just using a katana the whole time. It's fucking weird. Chapter 28. Lying is the quickest way to make a stranger of a friend. Joe is tired and he wants to give in. Helen says no and tells him to rest while she looks for a new shirt because hers is kind of covered in blood. And when Joe wakes up, she has a new shirt, but is lying about blood on her tummy. So she seems like she's bleeding from something, but she won't tell him about it. And then something drops into the arena. That's it. Again, like, these chapters are passing by so fucking quickly at this point just to fill space. Chapter 29. Everybody fears monsters. Well, that nice short sweet quote really describes what this chapter's about, because fuck all happens. Helen and Joe fight a giant moth monster. That's literally it. That's the whole chapter. They just fight a moth. Chapter 30. What becomes of morality when there is no right choice? Do the best you can? I don't fucking know. So Joe is still very suspicious of Helen's behavior, especially after she reveals that she would torture insects as a kid despite being horrified of them. So he agrees to rest again, but he stays awake, actually. When she ends up approaching him later, and you can hear her footsteps, she thinks he's asleep. Joe raises the halberd to scare her off. Like, he fake wakes up and he's like, ugh! And demands to see her stomach, because he's also noticed something that's only being revealed now, but he also noticed something on his own stomach. And they both look, and they have the number 1 carved into their flesh. So that was where the blood was coming from on Helen. Which, this is stealing directly from the story. This is like a direct room reference to No End House. Where, if I recall correctly, and I'm going to just double check right quick. Yeah, so the ending of the No End House creepypasta, in room 9, the main character encounters themselves tied up in a chair. Like, there's a clone of them tied up in a chair, and the clone has the number 9 carved into their flesh. And the clone is constantly pleading, please don't kill me, in their voice. And in the end, they have to, like, rip the blade through them, and it spills darkness into the room, and the story progresses from there. This is just taking from that. They have the number 1s carved into their bodies, and so they think that they have to kill each other in order to escape. So when Helen was approaching, she was going to try to kill Joe in his sleep, but he openly tells her that he wouldn't do that, and so Helen takes off into the arena, just whoop, 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 into the night. Chapter 31. The most cunning fighters are those who have everything to lose. Joe gets ready for the next fight, because obviously the two of them aren't looking for the exit anymore. They both think they know the way out. Lift comes up, new competitor emerges, and it's a clone of Helen. And this one's way more aggressive. Is like, come on, we gotta team up. You and me, we're the same person. We gotta kill this motherfucker. So they both attack him. And after losing track of which one is which, Joe pierces one of them in the chest with a spear. The other one lowers her katana and shows that the body on the ground also has a 1 in the flesh. So that means that they found the exit without killing each other, because they killed somebody that had a 1 in their flesh. So they're like, yay, we did it. And Joe asks for proof that she's the real Helen, and she tells him about how they met. They embrace each other, and she continues going on and on. She keeps telling him all this other stuff. It's like, I love you. You made love in the mushroom field. You told me about your dead wife and how her face was cut off with a jet propeller. And then Joe just snaps her neck on the spot. Because he never told her that Jen died to a plane propeller, that's why that was intentionally left out at the start of the story. This does feel very silly in the sense that, like, again, a regular middle-aged guy can just do the frickin' Superman neck snap and paralyze somebody, because then he has to pick up the katana and finish the job. Again, like, they both turn into, like, action heroes in these last, like, 7 chapters or whatever. And just, it feels so out of place. We're almost done, though. We're almost free from hell. Chapter 32. There's little value to life without death. Whoa. So, Joe picks up the real Helen's body, and he gets on the lift, and finally starts going upwards. And as he's on the lift, he realizes or believes that it wasn't Helen that summoned the clone, it was him, because he's the only one that knew about Jen's death, so it had to have come from his consciousness. So he feels guilty over all this. So lift goes up and takes it back to the room where Lardass was. He ignores Lardass and just keeps going back through the house. He goes back to the T corridor with the skeletons, goes back out through the door, and Isabella tries to speak with him. And it's like, oh, congratulations on clearing the house. And all Joe's like, he's just, fuck you. That's all he says. This is one of, like, the few moments I actually really liked in the book, is that Joe's emotional response here, he's very sad over Helen's death. He's miserable, and he's pissed off, and it feels real. It genuinely feels real. Like, just repeating fuck you to everything that Isabella tries to say. Even when she's saying, you can't just walk out in the street, like the reasonable thing. You can't just walk down the street with a corpse in your arms. He's just like, fuck you. I don't care. I don't have anything to say to you. I am done. It is one of the few moments that was actually kind of like, yeah, this feels like a real person's response. So he walks out of the house. He realizes that Isabel is correct, that they can't just walk down the street with a corpse in his arms, so he'll get caught. So he goes and he lies down under an olive tree in her front yard, and he falls asleep. And that's the end of the chapter. We can't cram in as many more chapters as we fucking can. Chapter 33, Some Goodbyes Are Forever. He has a dream of being back in his house, and he's saying goodbye to Helen for one last time. So he does. When he wakes up, he's back in the hostel, and there's no sign of Helen anywhere. He goes to the cafe, and he feels a very strong sense of deja vu, where he heads for the Gothic Quarter, and he wants to find the No End House. He does, but it's been completely abandoned and cleaned out. So there's just no sign of anything that happened before. And this takes us to the final chapter, chapter 34, which wraps up the book. The mind. Oh, the powers of the mind. Okay. So, Joe escaped the No End House, as he believes. Helen's dead. He has no reason left to be in Barcelona. So he packs his shit, and he's like, fuck this, I'm moving on to Morocco. So he tries to leave Spain. He gets detained at the border, and he's brought into questioning, because Helen has been missing for a week. His interrogator, Big Carlos, starts questioning him. I want to say, the start of the interrogation was actually quite good. I'm going to be real. I was actually, like, enjoying reading it during the start of the investigation. It was one of the few things in this book I actually really liked. Because Joe thinks his way through the interrogation very cleverly. He comes up with very good responses to the investigator's questions, like good answers to, like, why things were. Clever enough lies that aren't, like, super suspicious and fit within, like, proving him innocent. But that's mostly for naught, because then the second part of the interrogation happens, part 2 of 3, where Big Carlos tries to do this weird big plot reveal that Joe, they try to do a Shutter Island, where you're not actually just some guy that lost his wife and is traveling the world. You're a serial killer who murdered his wife and 7 little girls in the woods, and you murdered Helen, and you're walking around trying to escape the blame. And then he pulls out his journal that he's been keeping notes in as he travels the world. And it's like, why'd you call it the Book of Nine? And it's like, fuck off with this shit already, man. Listen, I read House of Leaves earlier this year as well. Fantastic. Might be up there for my favorite book now of all time. When I was reading House of Leaves, and House of Leaves appears within House of Leaves, like the main character just starts reading the book, and it doesn't make a lick of sense, that was off-putting. That was terrifying. The Book of Nine in this book has been nothing but frustrating and laughable at most. So it's showing up at the end as like this weird twist that like Joe was the one writing it the whole time just makes him look stupider, not more interesting. Also, all this is happening so rushed that it doesn't exactly feel like this is supposed to be the certain truth that Joe actually was a serial killer. This just feels like it's a possibility. Especially when we enter phase 3 of the interrogation, where Joe starts looking around the room, and he notices things in pairs, marking the number 2. He notices 2 fleur-de-lis cufflinks on the interrogator's cuffs. He starts looking around and starts seeing twos everywhere. And then we're back in like the good part of the interrogation where, okay, now we can't actually tell what part is real or what part is fantasy. Like, was the house actually real? Is he still trapped in the house? Because that's what Joe thinks, because he's seeing 2s everywhere. But also, things being in pairs is pretty normal. So, is this just Joe sanity completely dissolving at this point, and he still thinks he's in the house, but he actually did kill Helen, and he did kill his wife, and he did kill those girls. He's just lost it at this point. That aspect is kind of interesting. It's just that anything involving the serial killer idea is fucking awful. It's just, it wasn't built up right. It doesn't feel good. It's not interesting, in my opinion. I don't enjoy it. Like, I don't know. Like, anything that, suggesting that the house was fake, and that Joe is, like, currently going crazy in an interrogation room, because he can't accept the facts of reality, that part is interesting. It's the reality part that just feels so cliched and tacked on and just shitty as like a last minute reveal or twist to throw in. It feels so out of place and crap. Joe tackles the interrogator, he gets his gun, he breaks out of the room, he starts going, where's door 2? Where's door 2? And he starts shooting the gun around, and then a few shots go off, he gets shot, and everything goes into darkness, and he finds himself on his back. Helen appears to him one last time, and she claims that the No End House has them both, and they can never leave, and then she just vanishes into the abyss, and then soon after that, not even the abyss remains. So, implying that either that he died, and he was still in the house, and the house has claimed his soul, or this is just his last hallucination before he dies. Again, very cliched stuff, but there's little fragments and shrapnel scattered throughout this finale that kind of work for me. But that's the end of the book there. Overall, it's just such a fucking mess. And it's a mess that didn't need to be stolen. Like, one reference. I've read this publishing page over and over and over and over again to like see if like I'm missing something. I've read the for my page, the people that you made it for. I've read the back. There is not a single mention of Brian Russell anywhere. There is no mention of the sci-fi series, Channel Zero, anywhere. And I highly doubt that something so specific as this, something that blatantly takes scenes from the story, that is fucking named with the exact same convention as the sci-fi series, because No End House the Creepypasta is just one word with camelback writing, where the N and the E are capitalized. This is the way that it's spelt for the TV series. So if you just saw an episode of the show, and it's like, I'm gonna adapt that. Yeah, I think I'm gonna adapt that and not give any kind of credit. No. don't do that shit. Even if the stories were good, it's still not ethical in the first place to just be taking such blatant inspiration from someone's popular story to any degree of popularity and then just selling it as your own. On the Creepypasta Wiki, we use a CC BY-SA license, which means you can repurpose people's works for anything. You can adapt them, you can sell it, whatever. But you have to give credit. And that's the one fucking thing that wasn't done for this book. Credit was not given. I don't know if Brian Russell was reached out to and asked, hey, can I use your story? But there should have been credit given, even if Brian Russell gave permission. I think it's crazy that there wasn't permission shown or just an acknowledgement of the original work. Because I do not believe for a moment that this much material was original. There's a lot of original ideas in here. Not all of them are great, like the Jurassic Park section. But it feels like horror fast food is what I feel like I bought. It feels like horror fast food that is stealing its concept from something else. And it just made me irrevocably angry to see and experience. But yeah, I wanted to rant about that and get word out. Like, this is slop for the most part. Like, I do not encourage getting this or reading it. I'm very upset about this book. Yeah. And like, I don't want to do this because, you know, I don't know how popular Jeremy Bates is. It says that he's a national best-selling author. You know, good for him. That's great. You don't have to steal to sell well. But also, like, I don't want to do it because it's so hard as it is to get published, you know? So to actually, like, have your words printed onto paper and sold to people to be held onto forever feels like such a privilege. And to tarnish that privilege with stolen work just blows my mind that anyone would do it, let alone could get away with it. I don't know. I'm just rambling now. The book is like a 4 out of 10 at its best, in my opinion. I was not a fan. There's some very blatant errors scattered throughout that are deeply frustrating. But yeah, this is my second time doing a book on the channel. I did a little bit in This Is for the Future for The King in Yellow. Went a little more in depth on this one. If you enjoy these, let me know, because I'm enjoying talking about these. Yeah, that's about it. Don't support this slop. Don't support stolen concepts in books. Don't. In general, just don't.